We have drama with an art contest on Twitter with a person who submitted an entry being accused of tracing AI. It's wild. Let's get into it. Couple of things. One, again, don't send hate to any parties involved. Two, Kat, why does your face look weird? I got 4 skin procedures in Korea. I'm on day 4 of recovering. So this all started with Trix or Trickstar, who goes by the Twitter handle Sekushi EN. And they hosted an art contest, writing art contest prize, 250 USD. Every like equals plus $1. Every retweet is an additional $2 for a 1500 USD cap. Check profile for rules, ends March 30th. And attached is their reference sheet so you can kind of see, which character you're supposed to draw, with credits to the artist, My Petunia. Now, you're gonna be like, wow, it's an art contest. Her design is cute. The art adorable. What is wrong? Well, we have an entry from a person by the name of Cream or the Twitter handle Creamysicle. And they write, I don't often join contests, but I really wanted to try this one. And this is their submission. So as you can see here, we have a piece, and this is a drawing of Trix in water, holding a pool floaty with a ball next to her. And then Cream added the drawing without a background and a speed paint, and the video is a little sideways, but this is the speed paint of the art process. And some concerns were raised of the piece. So I just want us to kind of look over the speed paint here. I have my little bit of thoughts about this, and I'll point them out, and then we'll kind of go into the rest of this situation. And again, it's a little bit finicky because the speed paint is sideways. So for me, and again, look, I'm gonna add a bunch of disclaimers. I know you guys are probably tired of me, but this is just for people who are just stumbling across this video who don't follow me. Every artist has their own process to draw. Just because I do it one way and you do it another way doesn't mean your way is right and my way is wrong, or my way is right, your way is wrong. But there are things that most people tend to do and not very many people do, and there are things that are typically common amongst artists and things that are less so. So one thing that we can see here is with Cream's sketch, they basically start out with a straight sketch that is clean enough to almost be line art, as long as the fuzziness is cleaned up a little bit, which again, some artists do. They just straight out the gate start with bangs, eyes, and etc. A lot of other artists, they will typically do some sort of like shape blocking where they will like draw a circle for the head, a square for the torso, or like a rectangle thing with it for the torso, etc. to kind of block in where the body pose is gonna be. And then they move on from there. So again, like there are artists who do this. It's just not necessarily the most common thing that you would see. But yeah, the eyes, everything are very clean. Again, some people just sketch very cleanly. There's that. So this is always something that I point out when it comes to my videos, because there are artists who draw like this. It's not necessarily the most common thing that you will see, but it is a process, right? Where the artist would already color and shade their art piece as if the lighting was there. As in, look at how dark the whites of the eyes are, because that's taking into account that this character is going to be backlit. The environmental lighting is almost completely drawn into the hair before the environment is even drawn. We don't have like a light source direction, etc. Again, there are artists who draw like this. It's not really the most common way to draw. It's possible, but this is also something that you would see with people who tend to trace artwork, etc., because they don't know why it's like that. They just know it's there. You know what I mean? Like when people trace an art piece, if the art piece has extreme environmental lighting, then they will just be like, oh, well, I'm gonna put a white halo around the head because the piece I'm tracing has a white halo, without realizing that the reason there's this white halo is because your character is extremely backlit. Or they will add like shadows to the face and nose, and they wouldn't know why the shadow is there, but they would add the shadow because the piece they traced had the shadow. That is something that you will see with tracers, but legitimate artists also do draw like this. Goes both ways. So again, we kind of see their art process here. So again, this is what I meant by like the nose shadow. So here we have like extreme highlight on the nose, which is like, again, very heavy environmental lighting without really the light source being drawn in yet. So it's just one thing to note, right? Just because you do this doesn't mean you're tracing. Just because you do this doesn't mean your piece is AI, but AI tracers do this. So then we get kind of the rest of the rendering, etc. But yeah, this is where I kind of want to point out, because the character is already drawn in environmental lighting. Like it looks like it belongs in an environment that doesn't exist yet. So then the environment is being drawn in, we have the water being drawn in, etc. And look, the moment the blue is added, the lighting makes a lot of sense, right? And then of course some more environmental lighting is added in, etc. But then one thing that I thought was a little bit interesting is that, and again, maybe this is, did I miss it? I could have missed it in the sketch, but here we have the sketch layer, right? You can see it minimized, and there's no beach ball or pool floaty here, and still no beach ball, no pool floaty. And then later it's added in, so the beach ball is added to the side of the arm, the pool floaty is added to this side of the arm. Again, this is not a smoking gun. We didn't see them stick their art in an AI generator. It's just a little bit interesting because these things you would think would be like drawn in the sketch process to be like, oh, she's gonna hold a pool floaty and have a ball next to her. Some things, you're gonna add in later. You're gonna be like, well, it looks a little boring, so maybe I'm gonna add a ball or something, to add some more interest to the piece, etc. I just thought it was interesting that it wasn't drawn into the sketch because typically things this large, like a pool floaty, is not really an afterthought for a piece. You could argue like birds in the background, mountains in the background could be an afterthought. You're like, well, I think it'll look pretty with mountains. But the prop your character is holding typically is drawn in the sketch, the initial sketch. And then we have the finished piece. But other people have their thoughts as well. And Anna adds, now you're back to tracing AI. Very disappointed. I shouldn't have deleted my post back then. And Cream says, what are you even serious? I have posted the time lapse. And Anna says, lol, as if that's even convincing. No one starts with drawing the hair and the face at the same time. And as we can see here, it's the bangs and the face, and then some of the horns are drawn in. Again, some people do draw like this. Tracers also do draw like this. So, and this whole debate about the face and the bangs being drawn first, etc., had a big debate as well. So we have Crystal writing, hello, what? I draw starting from the eyes and bangs though. Where are you getting at? And Anna says, look closely in the video and you'll notice the difference between actually drawing without any base and drawing with the help of tracing. I've said enough on this. If you believe it or not, it's totally up to you. And Crystal says, I suppose it's a bit suspicious, considering their previous art is also a bit different, whether it's a low-cost commission or not. I'll keep this in mind, still not very sure what to think about this whole situation. And Cream says, start from starting before accusing I made the bangs first. The first before the face, it's not even a good point. And Sata says, hi, I'm an artist and I start with eyes and then bangs. After that, I draw the rest, so it doesn't mean that it's traced. I fear what you are doing is a very bad allegation without solid proof. Here's an example of a drawing that I made on my phone. You see a lot of things move, right? So they draw in the first sketch, and they're doing this in IBS Paint on their phone. And then they draw the eye, they draw their first eyeliner, right? And then they resize it, reposition, rescale it, draw the second one, move it again, and then they draw the eyebrow, and then resize the eyebrow, lift up, raise the eyebrow, draw another eyebrow. But you see how there's a lot of adjustments between the piece, because on the first go, most people who draw like this, you're not gonna one-shot it. If you draw without blocking, shapes, you draw literally eyebrow, bangs, like that. Most of the time, you don't get it right on the first go. Like, you're gonna move some things around, etc. So again, some people, absolute art gods, right? Out the gate, perfect. They're so practiced with drawing faces that they can do it with their eyes closed. So they don't need to move or reposition because they've drawn a 3/4 face profile 10 bajillion times. Most of the time you'd see people move stuff around though. So that's what you're seeing here, right? The ear is resized again. The ear is moved again. The line for the face is moved. The canvas is flipped. There's a lot of alterations going on here for Seta's piece. And then Cream made another post writing, everybody, before accusing somebody, do your proper research. It's so rude and heartbreaking that you accuse without any of your own research. The time lapse I posted was fast forward. That's why the line art was quick. Here it is without a fast forward, and this is an 11-minute 30-second time lapse. So I mean, we can look a little bit here, but kind of like this is what I meant by the face though, right? Like, are they tracing? We don't have a smoking gun, but their face render or their face sketch is perfect out the gate. The eyes are the perfect distance apart, which like I always get one eye a little crooked and you gotta like kind of like mirror it or whatever. If you're being lazy, I'll take the eye from one side and flip it and then like distort it a little bit so that it matches the face perspective, right? But out the gate, the eyes are perfect. No need to flip or resize. The mouth is in the same exact position. You know what I mean? So some artists do draw like this. Tracers also do this. And we see a lot more adjustments with the kind of the rest of the body here when they're doing the sketches. They're kind of repositioning things a little bit. But again, one thing that I thought was interesting was here when they're drawing the hip specifically. They draw the hip and they draw the bottom of the dress, the hem. And I guess they realize it's a little bit too long, so they kind of back it up and then they redraw it. But the silhouette, the shape, everything is very similar. Could be traced. Could just be they're really good at drawing hips. But yeah, I just thought it was very interesting that the pose was perfect out the gate. They later like minorly resized the head, but there's very little of the sketch that had to be liquefied, moved, cut out, lassoed, etc. But Cream continues, I hate on this app people judge each other so quick without any proper reason. I did so many redo and undos to get a proper line art. I can draw faces and hairs in seconds. I have good practice. But still in time lapse, I used lasso to get proper proportions. If you know anything about art, you will get that it's not traced. Instead of going and telling somebody that, quote, LOL, you traced AI, end quote, please do some research. Don't believe anyone's words too quick and judge. Cream adds, this is the least I can prove more. I hope no more drama on this. I'm already so sad about how fast people judge. And they posted a video of them drawing where they're sketching on a canvas and they're sketching one eye and then they're sketching the other eye. And they're like, oh, like this is to prove that I'm able to draw bangs and eyes first and then to move on to the rest of the piece. Like, oh, this is where the mouth is, etc. And kind of how they draw the mouth, to kind of prove that it's not traced. Because, Procreate, you can add a hidden layer, right? And then disable the hidden layer so that when you record the time lapse, it's not visible. So they're drawing the rest of the face here. And then Trick says, oh, thank you so much. And Cream says, my entry is eligible, right? As I have posted all proofs and I don't want my 3 days of hard work to go to waste because of false accusations of a random person. And some people aren't believing it. This person says the chicken scratch is crazy, be so for real, manipulative content. And this other person says, 1, it's heavily referenced or traced AI. 2, nobody sketches like that. And then Cream adds, well, I'll move on thinking this accusation is a compliment as it's hard for some people to believe that somebody can draw like this and they can't, so they decided to call it AI. LOL, but still her replies in my previous post will probably leave a negative view for some people. And so Trix posted as a quote retweet to Cream asking if their entry is eligible. They write, as I'm not an artist myself, I honestly don't know much about art in general. I ask that you answer not because you want more chances to win, but because you are wholeheartedly, this is what I was presented with. Please let me know your honest answer. Should their entry be kept? Now, I would say that some people might argue, oh, like maybe Trix shouldn't have taken this publicly, etc. But I mean, you do have to note that like people who don't know art don't know art. Like you don't know what you don't know. So I mean, I'm sure Trix could maybe consult some people that they know, but artists tend to have artist friends. And if you're not an artist, you may have artist friends you could ask. You may not, though. So if you don't have artist friends, you can ask, like, what do? You just kind of sit and be confused. So Redacted has sent them some DMs of a breakdown. So this is the page that Trix was presented with some things that were highlighted on the art piece that were suspicious. So Redacted writes, many art programs now allow you to hide certain layers during the time lapse. To identify traced or AI images, it has to be based on the process. Please know that during the sketching phase, Cream does what is referred to as feathering. If you guys don't know what feathering is, it basically refers to drawing really, really, really short strokes. A lot of them. Feathering is something that is typically done by less experienced artists, but it can be done for multiple reasons and you can do it for texture reasons, etc. But it typically indicates less confident line work. Redacted continues, a red flag is high level of rendering but lack of direction and beginner mistakes. And then Redacted continues, except it doesn't match a usual form of feathering artists will do when designing the layout of their piece. A red flag is the high level of rendering but lack of direction and beginner mistakes. And then 3 more points. Several lines lack direction or idea of a piece. A big telltale sign is the direction of the hair and how it's flowing. No guidelines or basic anatomy of what the piece is supposed to look like. Images drawn from top to bottom instead of piece by piece. Example, all the hair drawn at once, the face drawn at once, all the clothes. There is no building here. That's basically what you saw in the sketch, which is where most people were breaking it down, right? Where they were saying it's a little bit odd that it's like the head is completed, then the body is completed, and the legs are completed. A lot of artists, typically you would see their process. They would do a really, really rough sketch, like they would draw like a stick figure, and then they would flesh out the stick figure a little bit more. So maybe 50% finished, like 50% of extra details are added to the stick figure from head to toe, and then it's cleaned up again. So it's like a process. It's like a multiple set of steps. The best example I would give is like frosting a cake or making a cake. You would bake the cake, then you would add your first layer of pink frosting. Then you might take white frosting and then add the trim. And then the very end, you put the cherry on top. But you typically don't frost half the cake and then put whipped cream on half the cake and then put half a cherry and then put the pink frosting back on the other half of the cake. Everybody has their own process to draw. Now, more points that were added by Redacted. I also want to note the hips do not connect to the thighs correctly. The left arm specifically does not follow the line through the boob to the lower arm. They're going in 2 different directions. Suddenly adding the beach float after rendering with little to no alteration to the existing piece. Randomly included details that do not make sense. It makes me sad because Cream clearly has talent, but they chose to trace instead. I'm not one to police art, and I definitely don't want to pick their art apart, since they also give me minor vibes, but this is very unfair to other contestants who put a lot of time into their work. So just to give you some like visuals to what was kind of being talked about, this is the arm, right? So here we have the left arm, and the left arm goes into the boob, and then it should come out about here, except it comes out all the way from the inside of the boob. Again, these are like beginner anatomy mistakes, right? Here, this is one where we have the hair pop up and they just, I guess, forgot to color fill the background pink. to match the rest of the hair. But this is what they were saying with the flow of the hair not making sense. This character has really, really long hair, and then we have the hair curve out, curve back in, and then make a 90-degree right angle and cut out this way. And then if the hair is truly this long right here, we have a long chunk of hair, it goes into the arm, it should reappear in the back here, right? This part should be colored in with hair. Here we have the hair coming all the way down here. It should come out this way, right? And flow out. So Redacted has valid points in that there are what is considered like anatomical mistakes, etc., in the art piece that potentially doesn't match up to the level of rendering that we're seeing with like the very extensive environmental lighting that is added immediately into the piece, right? Again, maybe like the artist forgot. Sometimes if you're color bucket filling, you just miss this little chunk here and it stays blue the entire time. I've done that, it happens. I've also seen it happen with tracers. Also, by the way, I have my own personal theory as to what happened, and I will tell you my theory at the end of the video, and it's again my theory. But yeah, other things I would point out is there should be like a second sunglasses leg here. I would say it probably, like given the perspective, it probably would show up. But yeah, another point was the unnecessary feathering. And again, feathering is typically something that you would see with newer artists. And then Redacted added a random speed paint saying, you can tell how the drawing builds up to the point of where it is. One, base body and rough shape. So here we can see like kind of the blocking, and then extra detail is added. A little bit more of the hair is fleshed out. Some clothes are fleshed out. And then finally, extra details are added in. And Redacted says, Cream could argue they have their own process, but you don't just manifest this stuff out of thin air with this level of rendering and shapes, especially since they've had a history of tracing AI art in the past. Which, this history, I was trying to dig up, I couldn't find it. But if allegedly they do have a history of tracing AI art, that is a little bit more of a smoking gun here. They added 3 side-by-side slides of where Cream was saying that they didn't trace. And it reads, this video explaining I don't trace displays an entirely different sketching style. None of the feathering. While there isn't definitive proof, I'd also like to point out the strange pink lines around the line art. You could argue it's artifacts, but the video is 1116 by 720 and 30 FPS and are significantly larger than the line art and sits underneath the line art. They are likely tracing a sketch set to a very low opacity and brightness filter on the original video. Contrast is upped on the right. They also never show layers, so the video doesn't really prove anything either. And that was again in referencing to this piece, how the brightness is really up to Again, I mean, maybe they just really like overexposing their pieces. It could also be something that's traced. This is the piece that Redacted kind of worked over, where there are other things that are pointed out in here as well. The sunglasses were marked, the thick strand going to thin, going back to thick. I would say this one I would ignore, honestly, because it is an art style some people do choose to use. Like some people draw hair very ribbon-like, and ribbons just tend to have this type of like behavior. I would say though, typically when people draw hair like this, most of the hair they draw would follow this type of ribboning, as in like the little strand here, the side bangs they have would also follow the same ribboning pattern that you would see this like style that we don't really see in the rest of the piece here. There's like a nipple here. I would also point out a couple of other things I thought were interesting is that the shading doesn't really match. Like the shadows here on the boob are for hair strands that don't exist, right? Here we have the side of the hair here. Maybe that's the shadow for like this chunk. But then this extra chunk here is for a shadow for that doesn't exist. I would say this fold in the body, again, the commenter did mark this as strange. This is a design choice I've seen a lot of like people who draw an anime style tend to implement. The belly button in the clothing, this was marked as like a strange fold. Some people do choose to draw the belly button through the clothes as a design choice, so I wouldn't really think too much about this one either. They say the palm trees appear out of nowhere. I mean, if we do argue about the composition of the piece, she is in water. Doesn't necessarily make sense to have a palm tree coming out of the water. Again, some people do just want to add something else in the corner, so they might choose to draw that in. I would say for me, the more confusing part is how the palm trees have different leaves. Like, these are like palm leaves, and then these are like a different type of leaf. Also, sorry, I just thought it was funny because this video of mine was actually sent in the DMs. There was like a weird narrative shift in the situation where people thought Trix was accusing Cream of using AI. That was not the case. The accusation was that Cream traced. It could have been an AI piece they traced. It could have been something else they traced. But the accusation was that they traced, not that their piece was AI. Trix continues, absolutely last thing I'll be posting about this. This is why I was so worried. Please do take the time to read. So these are, again, DMs from Redacted, and Redacted says, no, that's okay. I could have gone more into detail on what I meant with high rendering versus anatomy and building skill level. I think the smoking gun is probably what the one person said about their previous art style not matching at all. Plus, they've had a history of tracing from other people's things before, but most artists at that level do some basic amount of shape blocking, even if they're using a 3D or image reference, like tracing the shape of the the body. It really sucks because they do have talent, and I think they'd really grow using the Clip Studio 3D model tool and IRL references instead of tracing AI or referencing it. I should have gone more in depth about the stylistic choice of adding gaps to the hair versus what was happening in Cream's picture. The hair doesn't connect back to anything cohesive. None of the hair is actually going that direction, and it massively changes depth and shape when doing so. When I block out hair, I usually add these gaps later on to add more dimension to the hair. This is something that Cream does, and it immediately just feathers it out. If they had an idea of what they wanted already, why does the sketching lines lack confidence? Also, I messed up the layering in the pic. Was supposed to show the rendering on the boobs, but it looks like I circled the face. Alright guys, I'm giving a really crappy MS Paint art example, okay? I think what Redacted is talking about, and so basically the hair looping back into the hair was like a big argument people were making because they were like, well, I do this too. I'm just gonna give my character like a teeny neck. Okay, but I think what Redacted was talking about is that the hair typically connects back into something that makes sense. So hair here, if we have somebody with really wavy hair, okay, let's just draw something like this, and you want to add a hair loop that kind of makes sense, some people would add like a loop like this, and then it would kind of flow back into the head. It would flow something like this, so you would add a little bit more dimension to the hair. And I mean, to make it look a little cleaner, I just erase the lines later like this. So it adds the flow that makes sense. What was being pointed out here with the Cream's piece is that you see the angle of how the hair strand connects back into the hair. It is almost at a 90-degree angle that they connect, which is not something you really see. You typically don't see hair making 90-degree angles point blank period unless it's in a ponytail or something. So that is, I think, what was being pointed out here. Not to make this all about math, but if it's at like a small, like 2-degree angle, it kind of makes sense. But if you have hair that's kind of going like this, and then you have a strand that connects in like this, it doesn't necessarily mean you used AI, but it means that you kind of didn't know what you were doing with adding the hair loop. Because the hair doesn't do this, typically. And Anna says that was exactly why the time lapse seemed even more strange. I know others will eventually figure it out, but that person won't admit it at all. Here is what a lot of people have to say. So Exo Trio or C says, as an artist, one common red flag is the huge inconsistency across work. I know for myself, I'm always improving and sometimes I do change my art style, but when scrolling through their profile, I see so much varying levels of rendering and artistic styles, like they're heavily referencing or tracing for sure. So going back into Cream's page, this is something that you can kind of see. So this is a piece that they posted March 25th. So they might not have made it on March 25th. It was just posted on this date, but that was 10 days ago, right? Maybe a little bit more. But as you can see, this is the level of rendering they're doing on this piece versus this was the piece they submitted to the art contest. There are anatomical errors with this piece, right? The left arm is definitely a lot more smushed than the right arm, and the right arm is missing an elbow. Again, look, I'm not trying to do this to flame the artist whatsoever. We are all learning, we are all growing. Every artist, you are still working on your piece. I am not a perfect artist by any means, right? I like the chest rendering, what's going on here. But I'm only showing you this to point out just the difference in the art from one piece to another, right? Typically, if you're able to draw eyes and bangs out the gate without having to adjust it whatsoever, and you get the body pose correct on one go, I would also assume that you would draw elbows and get the thickness of the arms even on the same piece. I mean, here we have another one they did for the boob trend where you can see, like we got very extensive boob rendering here going on, very shiny. One boob is noticeably larger than the other boob. And again, right, there are people, it's very normal to have boobs of different sizes. You typically don't necessarily draw it on your character of this degree. And then again, we have an armpit that's a little lower than typically where you would anatomically find the armpit to be. Here we have another piece as well. I really like the coloring choice they chose for the skin here though. This is beautiful coloring. And then, an eye piece they drew as well. And this was very pretty. And then here is another piece they drew in a different style. And then they have these pieces. But yeah, that's just kind of the point that I'm trying to make, is that there is a pretty big varying degree across their art styles and pieces, even within like a 2-week window. And like here is a piece they've done. This was like in the middle of January. So again, the art style is very, very different. And so Yukia adds, I think it looks sus because it's a little odd to be adding details without the base. Usually you draw a rough sketch of the base to dictate your pose. Most artists usually end up changing a lot here also, and refine, then add the details over the top, adding the hairs, eyes, etc. And then Crystal adds, threaded reply, hi, it's me giving honest critique to help prove that this person's art is not AI. Yes, some of the proportions are often not perfect, such as the alignment of the ears, horn, and glasses, random gap between shoulder and hair, and many more. And then Trick says, hey, I'm sorry if it came off as people saying it's AI, but that's not what's being said. I completely believe it's not AI. I just heavily believe it's traced from AI. And Crystal says, I still believe it's not traced, but only heavily referenced. I'll keep looking at the picture and writing the thread. Trix puts an update writing, I've come to a conclusion to revoke the entry. Thank you all for the feedback. There's too much evidence pushing against them. I ask no hate is sent. I wish for everything to be peaceful. On a more cheerful note, there's 7 days left. And then there was a post by a user Jade's Gates in the illustration community that reads, Dear artist, if you actually care about the community, please do not support this account. They falsely accused an artist I have worked with before of tracing AI, then blocked me for telling them it's not AI. And it is a screenshot of Trix's page. It infuriates me that people think they're entitled to slandering and tarnishing a small business and ruin an artist's ability to make money over jealous competitors who will only gain to lie and drag them down. They didn't use any verified way of checking like AI image tests. And everyone in the comments said it wasn't AI and that they even make the same mistakes. If you actually care about artists as human beings, please be aware of this. If you enter their contests, you may be next. And then Trix adds, please note this is not what happened. I never accused anyone of AI, only of tracing because that's what I was told and explained to about. Harassing somebody and trying to ruin their contest and my community even is not okay. I hope they find peace and move on. And that is a screenshot of the community post. And Trix adds, I really want to stop talking about this. I made my choice, especially because they have done this to others before. I have a right to be sus if I have multiple artists coming to me saying that it's traced. Please learn not to dwell on something you disagree with. And Aisha says, okay, this is downright nasty. Just because somebody takes commissions doesn't make them valid for tracing others' art or even tracing AI. I've seen this person, the said artist, copy other artists' work. And when confronted, they said it was heavily referenced and wouldn't repeat. Now that it's pointed out and you have made your decision, this is no way to treat an art contest. I am so sorry you're going through this. And Trix says, thank you. And Maddie says, haha, you got caught harassing somebody, so now you act like you're being harassed. Priceless. And Trix says, I haven't harassed anyone. And then here we have another person, Lunary's Chu writing, tracing AI is not the only form of plagiarism. It's very clear from the video that they were heavily referencing something else, heavily because anatomy went out the window. No way this wasn't plagiarized in some way. Just my take, I'll add more in the comments. And here we have more posts of Cream's work. So more of Cream's artwork, the boobs, and then the body, and then we have this piece, and then the eyes. Lunari says, these 4 pics are the same artist and that's insane. Absolutely crazy to me. I used to heavily reference art when I was a baby to practice, which is not the best way to learn, but to sell and profit off of art that is clearly not your own, art is a skill, take time to learn. And C says, girl, same. I was scrolling through their page and was like, huh? LOL at the number of inconsistencies and changes. And Lunari says, right, like, I get having different art styles or not having a consistent style, but this is extreme. It looks like 4 different people made these. And Kira says, exactly. I understand inconsistent styles, but they're all so different from each other. Not even the rendering seems remotely similar, but that's just my opinion on it. I hope Trix feels better after all of this. At this point, it's just disappointing. So I just want to go over this. People might take this as me like dogging on an artist's work, but I'm going over their art pieces to try to prove or disprove the claims that were made. I just think it's interesting because across the pieces, some of them have like very glaring anatomy mistakes that beginners tend to make. And then some have like god tier rendering, you know? So it's just odd because these are all posted in 2025. So these are all posted within like a 3-month window. We have this piece, it's a commission, right, from Cream, where there's a lot anatomically off. I mean, the side bangs are all different lengths, right? The left side and the right side don't match up in length. And you may argue, oh, it's because the head is turned. It doesn't make sense for the perspective of the head for the hair to be this uneven. And then we have the loop again, but it's like coming out at a 90-degree angle and going back in at a 90-degree angle, and then it disappears. And then there's like a massive cut into the side of the hair and it comes back down. One thing I thought was interesting was that, again, maybe it's a beginner mistake. You forgot to change the colors, right? But like part of the hair is this like light coffee color and the rest of it is this dark, dark gray brown. Like just one chunk of the hair is rendered in a different color. And then we also have, again, continuity issues with like the trapezius or the part of the shoulder going up and then it doesn't connect into the shoulder. Again, if you make these mistakes, it does not mean you are invalid as an artist. Okay. I've made these mistakes. I still make these mistakes from time to time, right? We all do that. We all make mistakes. Oh, and then the other mistake is, or the other thing is kind of like the cheek, right? Where you can kind of tell this artist didn't flip the piece because the cheek extends like really, really far out this way. Doesn't make you invalid as an artist for making it. I'm just pointing this out to show the inconsistencies because this is a piece that's made from like, a learning intermediate artist. And then, we have this body, which we've already looked at, kind of the arms are very uneven in size. And then we have like god tier boob rendering going on up here. They are different sizes, but we have like god tier boob rendering. So then it's kind of like, oh, well, it doesn't quite add up to this. And then we have this, and then we have like absolute god tier eye rendering. Holy, right? Like a little bit of like lighting incontinuities, right? Because like here, if the bangs hit like this, the nose wouldn't be lit up like this. But aside from that, like god tier rendering for eyes. Oh, and then we have like a little twig coming out of the hair, but we'll ignore that. But then you didn't get the arm thickness correct. It's like something is not adding up. Who am I to say this, right? Maybe they're just super fucking good at rendering eyes and only eyes. So then, Cream went on Twitch to disprove the claims, to live stream their process, to be like, I didn't trace. So this is how they started the piece, and we can see their layers here when they open it. They work with very little layers, which is like, some people just do this, They only have like 7 layers. They have 2 layer 3s though, which I think is pretty funny. But as you can see, they have a reference image in the corner. This, is this from a Zerlane? I think it might be. All right, and then we have the boobs or the neck that's being, referenced here. And okay, so after looking at their Twitch stream and they draw on Procreate, this is my theory as to what is happening, okay? My tinfoil hat theory. I am not saying this is what is actually happening. This is my conspiracy theory, my opinion, okay? But I think, worst case scenario, they traced. But I think what is likely happening is that they are crutching really, really, really heavily on referencing other artists' pieces. And as a result, it is leading to their art looking traced. Because as you can see here, they're referencing this art piece here, this blue-haired character, for the neck, and then they'll reference it for a majority of the body, as you see here. As they're drawing the stomach, right, they are heavily referencing the rendering of this piece for the stomach. They even color select off the piece to get the colors. So that is why all of a sudden their art looks so good compared to maybe some of their other pieces, where the piece of the masculine body holding the book by the crotch, why some of the colors, it was like still like good rendering, but it wasn't the like really, really saturated rendering that you tend to see with AI art or like, other game IPs like Azurlane and stuff like that. But if they're color selecting off of a art piece to get the colors, then suddenly their color theory is going to be a lot better because they're yoinking colors off of a piece. So here you will see them rendering the belly button and they zoom all the way into the belly button on the Azurlane piece. I keep saying Azurlane, but I'm not like 100% certain. To render the belly button. They even draw like the direction of the belly button the same, the coloring is the same. And then, but yeah, I think they noticed that there was like this line in the belly button. So they then go and like draw that in. And you see here, they draw that white line in the belly button and you can see that on their piece. But the thing is, they don't know why it's there. The white line of the belly button is following the abdominal muscle of this character, right? But her white line is like going off to the side. So it doesn't follow the abdominal line of the character. So that's why it just looks a little off. And this is my theory as to what's happening. Because Cream is heavily, heavily referencing, if not tracing, but my theory is just heavily, heavily, heavily referencing off of these art pieces. Cream doesn't know why this thing is there. They just know it's there, so they just mimic it, right? They were like, oh, well, this character has a white line in their belly button, so I'm gonna draw a white line. Without realizing that your piece is not this character with a gun, so therefore some things would apply and some things don't apply, right? Because again, the abdominal line of the character is up here. She like the abdominal line is drawn in. And then now she pulls up another character and we'll start rendering the boobs following this character. So as you can see, the boobs start getting rendered in, they start getting colored in, etc. And as we can see here, we kind of have like the uneven line art happening again, where it's like there's like a little pinch in the boob. But yeah, so Cream will basically follow the exact rendering of this character's chest, right? Exactly the shape of the shadow and highlights that's added, Cream will mimic it in their piece as well. So we kind of get in here. And again, Cream color selects off of the art piece. I don't think I've skipped to a part where you can see it yet, but when I was looking through the VOD, you can see in some parts Cream will literally color select off of the artwork that they're referencing and then use that color on their piece. So then we're back to the other character again, and then we come into rendering the legs. And then here they import another photo, and this was the reference photo for the skirt, and they're going to go and reference off of this for the skirt. We can see again, it's being referenced for the rest of the legs. Oh, right here, you just saw the color select, right? They just color selected off of the stocking color. And again, they're going to copy and mimic the rendering of the legs here. That rendering angle for the leg, that is like completely followed here. And again, you do see them, right? Like hand drawing the piece in the crisscross parts of the stockings. Do you see this line and then this line? And then this strap, this ribbon should reappear over here. As you can see in the reference that Cream is heavily referencing, it doesn't do that in the reference, right? It has a big strap, and then a Z. It makes like a Z shape, like a backward Z. Cream's piece, the ribbon should continue forward, and it should be a lot thicker if you're actually following the reference piece, but I digress, right? And again, Cream's art looks like this because Cream is heavily referencing without understanding why. It's like, it's almost as if Cream is essentially copying the piece, because referencing is kind of like, in my opinion, when you look at a piece and then you're like, oh, well, I like this aspect, I like this aspect, I'm going to interpret it for myself. But in my opinion, Cream is not really doing any interpretation of the artworks they're referencing, because Cream doesn't seem to know why things are like that. Like, why the ribbon is shaped like a Z here at the top, right? Back to my example, let's pretend this is a leg, okay, and we have a ribbon, okay? We have a ribbon, and you're gonna make a crisscross of the ribbon. Okay, this, it can make sense, right? Like this. We have a leg. Oh God, this is a horrendous leg, right? This Z kind of makes sense because if you see here, right, this ribbon that is horizontal is hidden by this ribbon that is on top. So that's why the Z patterning makes sense. If you were to draw it like this ribbon will not be hidden by this ribbon that's going over the knee. It would bend over the knee with a curvature like this. So it would show beyond it. It would kind of look like an H. But again, because Cream is like referencing the art piece so heavily, they're not doing any sort of like extra interpreting on top of it. Their piece is going to end up creating errors or having errors because of this. And as you can see, you see that with the crisscross of the legs here. Oh, geez. Oh, okay. I'm gonna say right here, the most egregious one is the hand. This is the most egregious one by far. And I again, I don't mean to be like dogging on them, but like your palms are not lined up at all. You got like broken fingers, like a line here, and then this one is all the way up here. The joining between your fingers is all the way up there. And then for the index finger, it's so long. It's like all the way cut in here. So I'm just saying, like, you want me to believe that you can render at this capacity. This is really good, like, lighting, environmental color rendering. But then you draw hands like this, like, it's just not making sense, the level of anatomy versus the level of rendering. And this is why people get suspicious with pieces, and this is why people were suspicious with Cream's piece. The level of anatomy and line work and some of the choices that were made with the art piece don't match up with the supposed skill level of the rendering that was happening, right? The anatomy is just not matching. That's typically when you will find out that the person traced, because they don't have the knowledge as to why the thing was like that. Here, they're color selecting off of the arm. I went back in their VOD a little bit because I just wanted to show you one other thing from this, or two other points. Here, you see that right there? They color select the blue or the blue bounce light off of this character's arm, and they draw the blue bounce light onto their character. But they don't even know why there's a blue bounce light on the arm. There is like a light on the wrist here, and they don't know why there's a light on the wrist, so they just drew the highlight on their character's wrist without knowing why it's there. The blue bounce light, this like cool colored blue bounce light, is coming from the gun because this character is wielding a cool toned white gun. So when the light hits surfaces, it's going to bounce onto your character. So because the light's going to hit the gun, it's going to bounce onto the arm of this character. Makes sense to add very cool toned bounce light onto the arm. This character is not holding a gun, nor is there really anything on this side that would bounce this like cool light onto the arm. So that's why it doesn't make sense the bounce light is there. There's also nothing that would cast a highlight like this on the wrist here. Like this highlight, it could make sense depending on the lighting, but like it could be like a gap between the gun and the boob and it's causing like a bit of the highlight because we do have a strong light source coming from this side of the chest. That could make sense. There's again nothing to cast this rectangular highlight on the wrist here. And then we get to the bow rendering. I'm backing up a little bit again, which again, we start really, really referencing this piece as well. And then Cream posted this side by side, before and after, also live streamed it on Twitch. Oh look, my art style went inconsistent again. Weird, isn't? LOL. And yes, I always take references, it helps me get more improved. Also, sorry for long video, last time it took me 3 days, I'm better than before. So here we have the pose and you can see some color blocking over the sketch here of the piece. And then here's the finished piece. And again, so when we look at the finished piece now, after looking at the stream, this is why people, I think, were so suspicious of the art piece they submitted into Trix's contest. Because things just look a little off. And it's because their art piece is, from what we saw in the Twitch stream anyways, it is hand-drawn. They did use their iPad pencil and put in all the pixels themselves. They put in all the brushstrokes themselves. But because they were so aggressively referencing off of other art pieces and essentially Frankensteining them together into one piece without any sort of interpretation or kind of understanding as to why things were done, this is why the piece just looks traced. Did they trace this piece? From what we saw on the stream, they didn't. We saw that they hand drew it. They did. Was this a piece, again, aggressively referenced to the point it looks off? Yeah. Because, I mean, just look, right? They were color selecting across their whole piece. So as you can see, like the boob coloring doesn't match the coloring of the rest of the body. It's more olive toned and the rest of the body is very pink toned. There's bounce light on the arm that doesn't really make sense. The lighting is awkward because they are referencing pieces with different lightings, right? They reference the stomach from the blue-haired I think Azure Lane piece. They reference the legs from a different character or like from a different piece. So the leg shadows and lighting doesn't make sense. There's lighting of the hip all the way up to under the skirt, which for this to happen you would need like a light down here pointing up her butt to get lighting like this. But then the boobs are really heavily top lit. But the boobs are lit like from the right side, but the faces and the arm is lit from the left side. That's why it just looks wonky because this is what happens if you aggressively reference. And I always say in my videos, hey, reference more than one piece. And they did. To be fair, they did. But they referenced like really, 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 really aggressively. They were color selecting off the piece and stuff like that. This is just what happens. And that is personally my theory as to what was happening with this piece they submitted. Did they trace this piece? Potentially, right? We don't really know. I have my suspicions about that. But I think, again, the reason why this piece looks so odd to people is because I think they were doing the same thing where they reference the boobs from somebody, they reference the head from somebody else, and they reference the hair from somebody else. And they're all different art pieces with different lighting. And it just ended up looking like this because they bashed a bunch of pieces together to make this piece. And they did paint it themselves, allegedly, right? But that's why it looks off. And I don't mean off in a weird way. I'm referencing to the fact that people were accusing them of tracing. This is why, in my opinion. And Lunaries commented under Cream's post, writing, so weird why it's inconsistent. It's not like you copy parts of other people's artwork and compile it all into one piece. If you genuinely want to learn art, it's not this way. I can help if you're willing, but stop copying and claiming other people's work as your own. And again, we have the side by side, right? The eyes, the facial positioning, the highlight. You see the highlight on the side of the cheek? That same highlight was replicated here. Now you see this eye. Again, we got the reference. They're heavily referencing for the eye rendering, the side by side of the face. Here, the body heavily referenced from this art piece, at least the boobs, right? And some aspects of the body. And Pipiru says, they use multiple references. I also use references sent to me as a help for hair or clothing in my pieces. It's not wrong to do. When did referencing become taboo in the art community? She drew it all herself. No tracing was seen when I watched her video. I am so confused. And Kiri Side says, this is literally something that most artists do at some point. Like you literally learn about mimicking and learning from different art styles at school. I don't understand why this is so different. And Kendio says, this is more of a study from AI art because I saw that all of their references are AI that they use. Their rendering method seems valid. It's just missing fundamentals. I replied to one of their posts, but I guess they didn't see it yet. I mean, whether the reference piece is AI or not, I'll have to take a closer look at the piece itself to really tell. I was only seeing like cropped images of it. Artist reference, yes, it is very, very common. You will be hard pressed to find artists that don't reference, right? That's normal. Frankensteining pieces together and you like literally basically copy the leg off of one character, right? Cream did draw it themselves with their hand, but you basically literally copy the leg off one character, you copy the leg off another character, you copy the stomach off another character, you copy the boobs off another character, and the face. That's not what people mean when they say, hey, it's okay to reference, or hey, yeah, you should use references. It doesn't mean one-to-one onto the piece. Like, that is crazy, okay? It means take a look at it, take elements you like, add your own interpretation to it, not color select and put it on your piece where it is on the other piece with no rhyme or reason as to why it goes there. Maybe I'm crazy, man. Like, everybody in the comments under Lunari's post were saying referencing like that is okay. I think maybe also the people saying that didn't see the Twitch stream, so they didn't see how the references were used. They probably just saw like face, eyes, and they're like, "Oh, well, she's just probably looking taking a glance over at the art piece to get a little reference." Right, which is fine. They probably just didn't see the color selecting and all that other stuff that was happening. And then Trix adds, crashing out, Cream just proved what we've been saying the entire time. What? I'm gone. And these are DMs between Trix and Redacted, where Trix says, isn't this literally what we've been saying the whole time? And they said, Lord. And Trix says, and isn't that still horribly wrong in the art community? Isn't it basically the same thing as tracing as well? And Redacted says, no, like quite literally, this is awful. They are copying other art and compiling it into one. Yeah, plagiarism. And Pandora adds, and now she's streaming referencing somebody else's work. Thank goodness not AI. And she just proved her points. She was heavily referencing the other artist's artwork's face into her piece. Like, if that's not heavily referenced, what else is heavily referencing? OMG, like Cream, bro, dude, girl, guy, if you really do not think you're heavily referencing others' work, simply add that artist you did reference to on X. And Anna says, I found the reference and it's actually AI. And this is the piece that was referenced. So much for that. And Trick says LMAO. And then Pandora adds, bro, gotta find better references next time. I'm not trying to bring hate, but AI will not help you improve building shapes and lighting. So here we have that same page with another AI generated character. Oh, this is Brady from Nikki, I think. Yeah, this is Brady. And then this is Cream's piece. And you can see the nose highlight on Brady versus the nose highlight on the Cream piece is basically the same. The body pose is really similar too. You see that like curvature of the like stomach fold and then the hip and then the shoulder. It is very similar. And then See Bunny Peep adds, I've heard of Cream Me before. They had DM me asking to commission them to pay their tuition. I checked their art and it all looked heavily referenced and traced. They also straight up traced somebody's fan art once and doubled down saying they drew it themselves. I've since had them blocked. And Trick says, it turned out to be true. They do heavily reference to the point of tracing. And then Cream doubles down saying, at this point, you are not educated enough to understand the difference between referencing and tracing. Even I did it live stream and your community will not stop harassing me. So I will not interact with your people. My community is with me and I'm happy. Please educate yourself. And Nara says, hey, I watched some of your stream highlights and this is what I have to say. You are referencing AI a lot. I would recommend against it. Learn from other artists, get together your favorite artists and study their art. It will help you much more. You are referencing way too heavily. It's basically copying, just as bad as tracing. Try to instead use pose references of real humans, bases, or figurines maybe. And as a last thing, update your card. The VGen link doesn't work there. I'm sorry you're getting attacked. I do not think people should come for you, but I do hope you can move on and grow as an artist. I hope both you and Trickstar can learn from this and try doing better in the future. I hope you don't see this as me attacking you since it's not my point. Wishing you the best of luck. And Cream says, I understand your point and will rather use real humans posing for referencing, but yet I never traced and neither used AI. But I get your concern and thank you for your kind words. I know you're not trying to attack me, and for VGen, maybe it doesn't work on my card, but it does through my link in bio. But I had found this other post made by Twitter user PR Ponyan or Pon writing, hey, if you're tracing and moving the lines, it's still stealing. And this is again because of the VTuber boob book thing or trend that has been going on. And here is an art piece. And then on the right, we have the one that was made by Cream. And it looks very similar, anatomically speaking. Right, the neck and the chin line up 1-to-1. The mouth position lines up 1-to-1. Part of the face line up 1-to-1. There is difference in the boobage, right? There is a little bit of difference here, but the hands, again, almost 1-to-1. Look at the finger posing. Very, very, very similar. And again, a lot of the rendering was kind of yoinked as well. Like you see here, there's a little like keyhole in the boob, or sorry, on this original piece, there's a little keyhole, and then there's a little bit of a highlight here. That same rendering was implemented. The same rendering, the shadow of the boob here, that is also implemented as well. Like, again, nobody owns like a boob rendering style, but I'm just indicating this to point out again how similar these two pieces are. Are they traced? Some aspects likely, right? Look at that shoulder right there. The neck is basically 1-to-1, etc. Are there some aspects that were altered? Yeah, but this is not really a good look for Cream. I'm gonna be real, right? If you have other pieces looking this similar to other artists, in my opinion, you can try to argue that I was just referencing da 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 da. Like you can die on that hill, but you've got pieces looking very, very, very similar to other artists and AI art in general. I'm curious about your thoughts. To wrap this all up, don't send hate to Tricks, by the way. A lot of people were like dogging on Tricks because they were like, oh, you shouldn't have called this out publicly. You should have tried to resolve this privately, da 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 da. And like, you could make that argument, right? Like to privately DM and be like, hey, da da da, like, did you trace? But it seems to me that Cream was very adamant on denying it and doubling down. So I don't think DMs would have gone anywhere, to be honest. And then, yeah, like if you're not an artist, you may not have artist friends. So who do you then go to for confirmation? You know, I can understand why this was made, just kind of like a hey, like, I don't know, right? Maybe that's just me because I'm more of a confrontational person. I'm curious about your thoughts on that scenario. But the whole second point is, did Cream trace the piece? And I would love to hear your thoughts as well. I personally think, was that submission piece traced? You already know my thoughts. I think more likely extremely heavily referenced. Now, argument number three, and I would also love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Some of you guys do like bullet point breakdowns of timestamps. I love that. Keep doing it. I like to read through and listen to your opinions because I am nosy, which is why I have this channel in the first place. But point number three is heavily referencing to the level that Cream did. Okay. And if you've watched through the full video, I showed you Cream's VOD where they were literally going through and like taking the boob, putting it on their piece, taking the stomach, putting it on their piece, like that, you know? They did hand draw it, but they were literally copying like every aspect, color selecting, and then replicating it. Is that okay? In my personal opinion, no. In my personal opinion, I think you are crossing the line. It's one of those where it's like you didn't technically break the law, but you broke like the sentiment of the law. You know what I mean? Like technically you didn't trace, but you basically did it. You know what I mean? But you technically didn't trace. So that's where I stand. Would love to hear your thoughts and opinions down below in this comment section. I hope you guys like this video because y'all love the longer videos, and I am back from Asia, okay? I was in Japan for 2 weeks. I was in Korea for a week. And if you want to see my travels, I have a travel Instagram and I have a travel TikTok page. Well, they're like my alternate. I just shit post on there, to be honest. But I'm posting travel stuff on there. I did 4 skincare procedures in Korea. I got my freckles lasered off. I did skin Botox, not like the face tightening Botox, skin Botox for my acne scars, Potenza, and 6 cc's of Redurin. So if you like K-beauty and stuff, I'll be talking about that over there. By the time this video is up, those videos are probably also up on those pages as well. But yeah, I would love to see you on my Etsy shop. I sell digital goods and stuff there. Also on my coffee, I do one-on-one coaching, and I also stream on Twitch 3 days a week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays at 6 p.m. PST. So I hope to catch you guys over there or in another one of my videos. Peace.